After last week's shooting that left 5 servicemen dead in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Florida Gun Supply is responding by setting up a so-called Muslim-free zone. Take a look at this.
Now, I have a moral and legal responsibility to ensure the safety of all patriots in my community. And so, effective immediately, I'm declaring Florida Gun Supply as a Muslim-free zone. I will not arm and train those who wish to do harm to my fellow patriots.
Located in Inverness, the gun store will refuse to sell to any Muslims that they deem sketchy. Now, as a result, the Council on Islamic Relations is firing back. Joining me now for more is from CAIR is Hassan Shibly, the Executive Director of the Florida chapter. Hassan, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So what is it the CAIR is doing in response to this so-called Muslim-free zone that's being instituted in this store?
Okay. Well, we've asked the Department of Justice to investigate and look into whether this violates any federal or even state and local laws. As you know, Florida has a horrible history, and the South, in fact, our nation as a whole has a horrible history of discriminating against people on an institutional level, especially as you talk about the African-American community in Florida, where they had to go to separate schools, separate bathrooms, separate restaurants. And then you had a period in history when the Irish, there were signs Irish need not apply, or Jews were not welcome. And this is the same kind of hatred now the American Muslim community is facing that other communities have faced before and continue to face. There is no room for discrimination. What makes America so great is that people are free to practice their religion without fear of harassment or intimidation. And we want to make sure America remains a free nation for all people. So we're investigating this to make sure that that kind of discriminatory treatment is not tolerated in our society.
Now, would there be some kind of legal argument that this store could use to try to deny people service?
It heavily depends on what the state, local, and federal laws apply. There are very clear federal laws that prohibit certain businesses from discriminating against people based on certain protected classes. So right now we're in the early stages of investigating to see what the law is and make sure that that store is being held to the law.
Now, originally there also was a post from a store in New Hampshire that said they were also going to set up a Muslim-free zone, but that post has since been removed. Do you have any update on what was going on there?
I'm not sure about the details of that store, but what's really troubling me is the utter hypocrisy of these gun store owners. Did they take any action after Charleston when 9 African-American church members, including a state senator, were murdered in cold blood by a white supremacist who hated them because of the color of their skin and used guns to commit that horrible murder? They didn't take any action at all. So why is it that only now they're taking an anti-Muslim stance when even the Department of Homeland Security has shown that exponentially higher number of people have been murdered by white supremacists in this country? And in fact, since 9/11, about 50 Americans have been killed by terrorists who call themselves Muslims in this country. However, in that same time period, over 200,000 people have been killed by guns in this country, and over 200 people killed by white supremacists. So they're not even really tackling where the real threat is coming from, and they're very hypocritical in their anti-Muslim biases.
I just want to bring up a comment from one of our viewers, Justice Holmes, regarding the video of the guy from the story. Says, and he said that in front of a Confederate flag. Overall, though, what would you say has been the development within this country since 9/11 of the way that we react to attacks, such as what happened in Chattanooga? At a certain point, it certainly seemed like Islamophobia was running very high in the country. But do you think that now things are starting to change and turn around?
Well, there is unfortunately a double standard, and that is whenever a deranged criminal does something horrible and he happens to be a member of the Muslim community, many like to blame the entire Muslim faith and the entire Muslim community for his horrible actions. But when a white supremacist does the same thing, or a Jewish extremist, a Christian extremist, or even an atheist does such a crime, it certainly doesn't reflect on their whole communities, nor should it. Surprisingly, however, Islamophobia is higher today than it was right after 9/11. According to some studies, after 9/11, about 40% of Americans had a negative image of Islam on the day following 9/11, whereas in 2010, it was over 50%. And that's heavily due in part to the Islamophobia industry, where people like Pamela Geller, Robert Spencer, and others are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, according to CAIR's latest study, over $160 million to demonize Islam and Muslims in this country, and frankly, attempt to outlaw Islam. In Tennessee, not too long ago, they tried to pass a law that would prohibit the practice of Islam and make it punishable by 20 years in jail. And these concern us not as Muslims, but it concerns us as Americans because it's un-American. It offends the First Amendment, it offends the U.S. Constitution, and it makes us less safe and less free. It makes us less safe because you miss the majority of threats that have nothing to do with the Muslim community. It makes us less free because it undermines the First Amendment, and that's why as Americans we stand against these kinds of discriminatory laws and policies.
All right, Hassan, thank you for joining us today. We'll be sure to keep following